Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm talking about the books that I read in March. I don't think I had the best reading month, in all honesty. I found it a bit hard to concentrate a lot over the last month, and yes, it just hasn't been an amazing reading month for me at all. But I did still read some really good books in the month. For the most part, I actually went back to some comfort reads. I reread some favourite books this month, and that was really nice. I mean, definitely at difficult times, I always turn to books, and at those kinds of times, I really do love rereading some favourites of mine. So with that in mind, I have listened to a lot of books this month through Audible, and a lot of them have been light mysteries, and I've been really on a bit of a Patricia Wentworth kick at the moment. I've read so many of the Miss Silver books. Well, I've read all of them myself years ago, and I've just actually started getting them all on Audible, and I'm really enjoying listening to these books. I've spoken about these before on my video about Golden Age mysteries, but if you haven't heard of Patricia Wentworth before, then I so recommend her books. If you love Miss Marple, then you would love the Miss Silver mysteries by Patricia Wentworth. Miss Silver is quite a bit like Miss Marple. She's an elderly spinster who used to be a governess, but now she's a private detective. And she's such a great character, but I really enjoy the mysteries. They're very light, very cozy style mysteries. There's generally a little romance that goes on in them as well. And yes, they're the perfect sort of comfort reads for me at the time. So I've been listening to a lot of the Miss Silver mysteries as I bake cakes and things like that at the moment. And they've been really keeping me happy at this time. So I really recommend these. And then another reread for me this month was A City of Bells by Elizabeth Gooch. I've spoken about this book before in one of my videos about what to read when you're self-isolating, and I so recommend this again. I reread this myself this month and it brought me so much comfort at a difficult time. It's a really beautiful story. It's set in Edwardian England, and it's about a young man who has been injured in the Boer War, and he doesn't know what to do with his life. So he goes to, I think it's called Torminster. Yes, it is, which is a fictionalized Wells. Elizabeth Gooch partly grew up in Wells herself, so she was very familiar with the city, and Torminster is based on Wells, and the descriptions of it are so beautiful. This starts in the springtime as well, and the descriptions of spring and the beauties of nature, part of what make this novel so special. But Jocelyn, who's the young man who's just come to Wells, he goes there to stay with his beloved grandparents, and when he gets there he falls in love, and he also starts a bookshop which becomes successful. And I love that. I love the idea of going somewhere and starting a bookshop. I mean, that's just a wonderful premise, I think, for any book. But there are so many charming characters in A City of Bells that make this such a memorable read, and rereading it is just like meeting old friends again. So it really is one of those books. It's just such a cozy, comforting classic. It deals with sadness too, but it's also very much about how to overcome your own private demons and how to still live a happy life. So yes, I so recommend this, and if you're new to Elizabeth Gooch, this would be a great place to start with her books for adults. Then I read this book, Bewildering Cares by Winifred Peck, which is published by Dean Street Press, and it's one of the Furrowed Middlebrow books, and I really enjoyed this. It's a about the wife of a vicar. She's living in this town near Manchester, and it's all about her daily life that she sets down for a friend of hers to read, because a friend at the start of the book writes to her saying she wants to know what has become of her over the years and what her life is like. So she sort of decides to set down her daily activities for her friend. So it's got quite a slow, gentle pace to the book, but I really loved it. It's quite a comforting read for right now. It's set during World War II, and something I really enjoyed about it is it mentions a lot of the comfort reads that the narrator herself loves to read at the time. So a lot of P.G. Wodehouse, Angela Thirkell, Diary of a Provincial Lady. And I really enjoyed that. But it's also full of just really interesting period detail and what it was really like to run a house at that time. And I mean, I'm always interested in World War II and the interwar years. So I love books that have a lot of great period detail to them. So I really enjoyed this for that reason too. And then I read another Dean Street Press book. They republish a lot of really great books. They republish a lot of D. Stevenson, for instance, and just quite light but much loved books from the sort of interwar years and World War II, that kind of era. So I've got a lot of their books, and the furrowed middle brow selected books are particularly good. They're particularly the type that I enjoy. So this is another furrowed middlebrow one, and it's called Miss Carter and the Ifrit by Susan Alice Kirby. And this really is quite a silly book in a way. It's about a woman who, when she throws a log onto her fire, accidentally releases an Ifrit, which is a sort of genie. So it reminds me a lot of Five Children and It, but for grown-ups. And the genie starts to grant her wishes, although the genie is perhaps a lot more well-meaning than successful. And it's just a very funny, light-hearted book. Again, there's a bit of romance that goes through it, and again, it has a lot of really interesting period detail. This is set during the war, right towards the end of the war, and I really loved all of the period detail in here as well. So yeah, really recommend looking at some of these Dean Street Press titles, because I enjoy so many of them. And then P.G. Wodehouse, of course, I always adore, and especially when I feel like I need an extra good laugh, then I turn to his books. They're always some of my favourite Audible books. One of them I read this month is Meet Mr Mulliner by P.G. Wodehouse. I love the Mr Mulliner short stories. They're absolutely hilarious. Mr Mulliner is an elderly gentleman who sits in a pub and tells stories about the Mulliner family, and the stories are always very unbelievable but really, really funny. And there's some really classic short stories in this. So yeah, if you want a really good chuckle, then this is an excellent book to read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it this month. Another reread is The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill. I first read this when it was published as a hardback last year, but then just this week I interviewed Elizabeth McNeill for Tea and Tattle in celebration of the paperback release of her book. So before doing the interview, I wanted to reread it because it had been quite a while since I'd read it, and I wanted to refresh my memory of the book. This is such a good story. It's set in the Victorian era. It's all about women and art and the pre-Raphaelites, especially the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood in Victorian society. A young woman called Iris is desperate to become an artist, and she attracts the notice of a member of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood called Louis Frost, who is a totally fictionalized member of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Elizabeth McNeill does write about some of the real life members, so Millay and Rossetti and even Lizzie Siddal are characters in this book, but the main story and the main action are based around entirely fictionalized characters. So Louis Frost is a member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. He spots Iris and knows that he wants to have her as his model. And she eventually agrees to this, but on the condition that he teaches her how to paint. The other side to this story is about a man called Silas, who has a shop where he sells all sorts of taxidermy, and he sells some of these stuffed creatures to artists to paint. And one day he meets Iris and he becomes completely infatuated with her to a really obsessive degree. And so there's this really disturbing element to the story too, where Silas's obsession with Iris just grows and grows throughout the book. Iris, meanwhile, is completely oblivious to this danger that is growing and growing, and it's quite creepy reading it as the reader, because at first I think you have some sympathy towards Silas. He's had a difficult life and he's one of those quite neglected people who is also very lonely, but then the more you actually delve into his mind and see what happens, you realize that he is actually a serial killer. And it's really chilling, but really, really good. Such a gripping read. It's a great, if you like Gothic literature, then you will definitely enjoy this. But I also loved it because it really is about women's ambition and what it was like living under the male gaze, both in the context of the art world, also in the context of, well, the broader context of Victorian society at that time, but also how women still deal with some of those same issues today. So yes, I loved talking to Elizabeth McNeil on the podcast about this book. There's so much to say about it, and if you haven't read it yet, then I really recommend it. Such a gripping read. And then a book I'm currently rereading is The Children of Green Know by Lucy M. Boston. This is such a classic children's book. I absolutely love it. I have been thinking a lot about books about homes, you know, that have home as a real central theme to the book. And the house in The Children of Green Know is a character itself in the story. It's such an important part of the story. It was based on a real house that I would love to visit one day. I think you can sort of request to go around it, and I would love to do that sometime. Once we're through all of this, then I definitely do want to do that. But yes, The Children of Green Know is such a wonderful classic to read. Like I said, it's very much about a place and the people associated with a particular home. It's just a beautiful story, and I loved it when I was little, and I'm looking forward to really delving back into it now. So that's my sort of read at the moment. Then this month I also read The Austen Girls by Lucy Wolseley. This was just published at the start of April, but I had a proof copy, so I read this in March and I really enjoyed it. This is a young adult book, but I loved it as an adult too. It's about Jane Austen's favourite nieces, Anna and Fanny Austen, and it's a work of fiction, but a lot of it is based in real historical fact, and it's about these two girls where they're on the sort of cusp of womanhood. Their mothers are wanting to marry them off very quickly, and they turn to Aunt Jane for help and for guidance at this difficult time in their lives. And I think Lucy Wolseley has done a fantastic job with this. It's very readable. I love it as an adult, but I think I also would have really enjoyed it as a teenager, when I was just starting to get to know Jane Austen and loving Jane Austen. I would have really liked to have read this then as well. And there's some really sweet little illustrations at each chapter heading, which I think is really nice. So I really recommend this. It would also make a lovely Easter gift, I think, for a young teenage girl. So yes, I would definitely recommend that one. And then reading the Austen Girls made me want to reread Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Wolseley, which I loved when it first came out, but I wanted to read it again. And this is one of my favourite biographies of Jane Austen. I think it's so well researched. I really like Lucy Wolseley's writing style. She isn't difficult to read, but she's very informative, and I really enjoyed this aspect that she took in examining Jane Austen's life. So she looked particularly at the homes in which Jane Austen lived, but also at the houses that were important to her. So the houses that she visited and that were owned by some members of her family, and how those houses and her own experience of home life inspired her novels. And it's just a really fascinating read. I so recommend this if you want to find out more about Jane Austen's life, or you want a more in-depth perspective on her books as well, because reading this made me really think about her novels again, from different perspectives, and especially thinking about how so many of her heroines are displaced from their homes at the start of the book. And it made me want to read Mansfield Park again, or listen to it, because I have it on Audible and I love listening to all of the Jane Austen books, because Lucy Wolseley writes quite a lot about Mansfield Park in this, because she says that it's one of Jane Austen's novels that's most preoccupied with houses and what home really means, and also the heroine is really gifted with a home, not just a husband at the end of the book. And that's very important, in fact, to all of her heroines, but perhaps particularly to Fanny. So yes, I love this book. If you want to learn more about Jane Austen's life, then I so recommend this one. And then finally, Nightingale by Marina Kemp. I read this at the very start of March. I think it was like the last weekend of February and the start of March, and I really enjoyed it. It's set in rural France. It's about a young woman called Marguerite who has fled from Paris. You're not sure why at the start of the book. You just know that she has a secret. And she's come to a very rural part of France to be a live-in nurse to an elderly man who is dying. And Marguerite really only knows the language of the carer. She's very, very good at her job, and she's able to express herself very eloquently when it comes to helping her patient. But she becomes completely tongue-tied when people in the village try to make friends with her, or when she tries to have any kind of normal interaction. And you realize that this almost loss of language, or loss of knowledge of how to really interact with people, stems from a big trauma that happened to her. And while she lives in France and she starts to make some tentative friendships with other people, she really has to come to terms with her past, with this trauma that happened. And so this is very much a novel about rebirth as well. And it's very sad in some aspects, but there is also a lot of hope to this book too. I thought it was really beautifully written. It's a debut novel, and I thought it was a very strong debut novel. I liked the title. It's actually called Marguerite in America. That's the title it's being published as. But Nightingale I enjoyed, partly because of the sort of reference to Florence Nightingale through the title. And this is very much a book about what it means to be a carer and the kind of tax that takes on someone who is a carer. Marina Kemp went through a horrific incident in her early 20s when her older brother was brain damaged after a skiing accident, and she became very much involved, as did the rest of her family, in taking care of him for years before he eventually died. She wrote a very moving article about that I read, and a lot of that goes into this book too. You can tell this has been written by someone who's been there, really, and it's very moving because of that. But I loved the language, I loved the French setting, I love France, and I thought Marina captured part of what rural France is like very well in this book. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this one too. But anyway, those are the books that I've read in March. I'd love to know what you've been reading this month, so do let me know in the comments down below. As always, I'll link to these books in the description box so you can check that out. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give me a thumbs up if you did, and you can subscribe to my channel by clicking my face that pops up somewhere around here. But I'll be back again very soon with another video. Bye!